In this video, we're going to talk about reflected ceiling plans, and we're going to begin by just talking about what you're seeing on this sheet as far as composition goes and what's shown on a reflected ceiling plan. We're going to talk a little bit about annotations, and then we're going to go one by one and learn about the symbols that you see. So just to begin, a reflected ceiling plan is a special kind of plan that shows what you see if you were to lay on the floor and look up at the ceiling. So a reflected ceiling plan will show what's on the ceiling, and in addition, sometimes we also show the electrical outlets. Even though these aren't on the ceiling, they are somewhat related to the lighting that we see on the ceiling, and they would concern an electrician who would also be looking at this plan. So because our project is small, we're putting both on the same plan. But in projects, we will see just the lighting and electrical on one plan, and then the mechanical, air conditioning, and emergency lighting and things like that on a different one. But because our project is small, we're going to put all of the stuff on one plan. And we'll go through one by one, and I'll show you what I mean. From a composition standpoint, this page looks a little bit different than the other ones that we've seen because it's got a plan on the left-hand side and it's got a legend on the right-hand side that connects all of the symbols from the plan and defines them for you. But like other plans that we have seen, it has a north arrow and it's got a drawing number and a drawing name and a scale and a title bar. And it's also got a set of dimension lines on the top and bottom. And if we take a look at these dimension lines, we can see something kind of different. We see that the dimension lines are actually calling out specific items on only this plan. So first, we're seeing on these overall dimension lines up here that it's calling out the difference or the distance from the wall face on the right side or the east side of the building to where this drop ceiling will happen over the cafe, and from that edge of the drop ceiling all the way to the wall that it's attached to. Also, we see dimension lines calling out the center of, from the wall to the center line of these symbols here across. And very kind of hard to see, but we don't have a lot of options, dimension lines calling to the center line of these objects here. Okay, same thing with the bottom. On the south wall, we can see that there's some large dimensions that indicate the width of this drop ceiling relative to the distance from each wall. We can also see here we've got dimensions from the edge of the drop ceiling to the center line of some of these elements here, so that the person installing them knows where to place them. And then same thing along here along this side. So now that we have an understanding of basic layout of this sheet and some of the annotations that we're using to call out this information, I'd like to now look at the drawing itself and kind of deconstruct some of the symbols that you're seeing here. First of all, on this floor plan, you can see that all the walls are in the same place as they are on the floor plan because, of course, the walls don't move whether we're looking at the floor or the ceiling. But I also want you to notice that you don't see the doors or the door swings on this plan. Instead, you just see the white part where the door casing would be. So if you laid on the door right at the threshold and looked up, you would see where the frame of the door is, and that's what you're seeing in this. Okay, a couple of other things. This reflected ceiling plan has been laid out with care and precision to make sure that everything works and everything shows, so that kind of the design process has been taken out for you. But I want to start by just giving you a little bit of a reference point of sort of what I was thinking when I designed this. The first is that the ceiling itself is made of this texture here, which is ACT, or called acoustical ceiling tile. And that's what you're seeing on the legend over here. It's 24 by 24 acoustical tile ceiling, and the height is at 9 feet 6 inches AFF. And AFF stands for above the finished floor. So if you measured how high the ceiling was in just the area where you see these squares, the ceiling will be 9 feet 6 inches. Now, we label these acoustical ceiling tiles 24 inches by 24 inches, not 2 feet 0 inches, which is our standard dimension format. And that's just the way it is. I don't know why, but that's just how it's done. So you can see here, I've got this relatively boring, inexpensive ceiling treatment in the main areas. And what that does, if you recall the section, is that it actually kind of covers up all of the ductwork and all the other ugly stuff that's within the plenum space. Now, there's a couple of areas that I wanted to draw some emphasis, and so I created a drop ceiling. So in section, you'll see this, but you'll see that the drop ceiling here and here comes down just a little bit lower. So if this acoustic ceiling tile is 9 foot 6 inches off the ground, the wood plank ceiling is at 8 foot 6 AFF. So that means that the bottom of this is 1 foot lower than the bottom of this. Now it's still high, you know, because it's 8 feet 6 inches above the finished floor, so no one will be able to touch it or bump their heads. It's dropped ever so slightly. So those are the two ceiling types, one that's going to hide the ductwork and be not so expensive, and then one that's going to add a little bit of emphasis and some beautiful texture that's going to coordinate with the matching floor underneath. The other ceiling type that you see here is this solid one, and you can see it's right over here on the legend, and this is called painted gypsum. And gypsum is the same as drywall, so it's just going to be a smooth drywall ceiling, but we call it gypsum board or gyp board or gypsum wall board, which is abbreviated GWB. The ceiling height here is at 8 foot 0 inches AFF, and that's because in a restroom setting, a little bit more intimacy and privacy can make people feel more secure psychologically. So when we drop the ceiling down lower, it kind of gives that feeling of coziness. And also, it's a little bit more expensive to finish and paint these ceilings, so we kind of want to minimize where they go. So there's a change in ceiling heights throughout this space, and you can see it here. And now this information will also be put on your finished schedule. Remember, we had left some columns to the right of the finished schedule, and we'll look at that at our homework assignment. But that information is also going to be reflected on the finished schedule because it's related to the finishes. So now that we understand what the ceiling treatments are and why they were selected, now I want you to focus in a little bit more on the design of this. So as you can see, all of the objects, even though you may not know what these objects are yet, there is a sense of repetition and an orderliness and a designerliness to the layout of the ceiling. So there's symmetry, there's, you know, predictable placement of things, and that's because I created a grid, and I made sure that the grid was spaced evenly in the main parts of the cafe, so that then as I started to drop things in the grid, they would also be aligned. So you can see here, I drew lines every 24 inches or every 2 feet 0 inches here, vertically and horizontally, and I made sure that they were centered here on this wall and here on this wall. See, the spacing is the same on both, because that's really where people are going to notice the symmetry the most when they first walk in this door. The symmetry is maintained almost over here, and probably once they actually put this grid on, this little sliver of drywall won't be there, or this little sliver of acoustical ceiling tile won't be there. But for right now, it does show because that's where the grid ended up. In the kitchen, you can see I started the grid over again here just to make sure that it was centered, and you can see it's centered on the width as well. It's not centered here just because it's got you know, the thickness here on this wall, but then it kind of spilled over into this room, and probably this drywall or this wall is not going to go slab to slab anyway, which we know. So the acoustical ceiling tile would just sit right on top of the wall itself. Okay, so you can see here I've got this grid. Now you may have seen these 24 by 24. They also come 12 by 24. And again, you probably have seen these in classrooms and office spaces and things like that. And the reason why people use these is because it allows us to then put all of these other items within the grid quite easily. And so let's take a look over here and just look at these uh, symbol by symbol here. I'm going to start by looking at the items that fit right into this acoustical ceiling tile grid. And the first one are these, and this is 24 by 24 parabolic trofer. And a trofer is just a fancy word for those um, big fluorescent lights that are not very pretty, and they're square, or sometimes they fit in a 24 2 by 4 acoustical ceiling tile grid, but they're just kind of popping. They have the diffuser lens. You usually can't see the bulbs behind it, and they just slide in. Now, the placement of these within the grid depends on the brightness of the light and the ceiling height, which will determine how many you need to place and how far apart they need to be. But as a general rule, I try to place mine about 6 feet apart, or sometimes 4 in smaller spaces. So you can see here, I've got them placed evenly in the acoustical ceiling tile here, you can see. Okay, so they're all these are just, they pop right into that grid, nice and easy. Okay, so those are the lights. You can see there's some in here in the kitchen. You can see there's some in the office and in the storage room. You can see they come down this corridor as well. So those would be what we consider ambient lighting. Moving down here, we see another object. This is another thing that just pops right into the grid, and this is an air supply diffuser. So that's where the cool air comes down. Okay, and you can see those are coming here. Any place that there's an X, here, 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 here. So these are placed by the mechanical engineer. And a mechanical engineer does a lot of things, but they're focused on air supply and air filtration and the air, cycling in and out. So the mechanical engineer is going to tell you where they need to go in, and he or she may even make their own plan that then you as the interior designer have to coordinate with the other things on the ceiling. But as a general rule, it's, you try to place them where you think there's going to be, they're sort of far away up against the edges of the room a little bit, so that you don't have cold air blowing straight down on people. But they also are sort of far away from the thing that we're going to look at next, which is the air return diffuser. Okay, so the next symbol here we're going to look at is the air return diffuser. And the air return diffuser is what sucks the old air out and puts it back to all of the mechanical equipment to recycle it through and cool it down. So it's sucking the hot air out of the room while the air supply is putting cold air into the room. So it makes sense then that we might see the air return vents where there's going to be a burst of hot air coming in. So every time you open this door, hot air from the outside, if you're, in Florida, let's just say, is going to blow in here. And so it's going to kind of pool right here. So you can see I placed an air return vent right there. I also placed one here by the back door. I placed one here in the kitchen because there may be some hot things happening here. I also placed one over here because you can see from our plan that this is where a lot of the coffee is being made. So you know how when you make coffee, you're steaming up things, and there's just hot air, hot water, microwaves, lots of hot things going on back here. So there's a return vent here as well. I've also put one in each of the storage and the office, as well as in the restrooms. So again, sucking up any kind of hot air, usually they're placed close to the door and they're placed farther away from the supply vent. So again, a mechanical engineer is going to figure out how many of these things you're going to need for each space, how big they need to be, how big the ductwork needs to be that connects to them, all of that stuff. But for right now, I'm just kind of showing you where to place them for just, like I said, design intent and planning purposes. So the two are spread away from each other. The supply and return vents are spread away from each other so that they don't sort of negate each other in a bad way. The next thing that I want to show you here that also fits into the grid is the exhaust fan. And that's really just, sucking up bad smells, sucking up any kind of smell really. And so we want to use that for ventilation as well. So you can see there's two of those in the kitchen area, and they're right next to each other. They could also be placed over here, but I was trying to keep them away from the supply vents. You can see that there's one in each of the bathrooms, or pardon me, the restrooms, and those are really the only places that we need them right now. Okay, so now that we have looked at the things that pop into the acoustical ceiling tile grid, now we're going to look at sort of the accent lighting and some of the better looking objects in this space. So I alluded to earlier that we do have ambient lighting coming through with these fluorescent trophers, but we're also going to want some accent lighting and some unique looking things that are just going to kind of express some of the design intent and the design concept in this space. So I have put a series of pendant lights here, and that's the symbol that you're seeing right here. Pendant lights hanging right at the front of the bar here, right over the bar, and then also hanging down in this little booth area here. Now notice, they're hanging down on a ceiling that's 8'6". So code indicates that you have to have things hanging from the ceiling. They have to be above 80 inches above the finished floor. Otherwise, a very tall person could bump their head. So you can see here, these aren't going to have a really long cord hanging down because people would hit their head on them. So they're very short pendants, but they're just enough to give a little bit of sparkle and interest. And that's the symbol that we're using. But there's a lot of different symbols that are used for pendants. But as long as you use it so that it matches that it's keyed back to a legend, there's a little bit of variation that's allowed. Okay. Then the other things that are on the ceiling that are going to provide a little bit of accent, we also have 4-inch recessed downlights. And these, again, are providing some ambient lighting, but they're providing it in the places where we don't want to put a parabolic trophor, a fluorescent trophor. Now, a 4-inch recessed downlight is probably going to have an LED light bulb in it, so it's going to be really bright. It's going to put off a lot of light. And again, these are placed using algebraic formulas, among other things, to figure out where they need to go so that the rest of the space gets even lighting. So there's a lot of variables here. Again, the type of bulb, ceiling height, the spray of the light itself, coming down, coming through the lens, a lot of other things that we're not concerning ourselves with because it's outside of the scope of this class. But I'm putting them here, you can see here, I'm putting them about 6 feet apart from each other, and I'm putting them just in the places where I don't want to put an ugly trophor in my beautiful wood ceiling. So you can see I've got them placed here so that the people that are making coffee in the cafe can see what they're doing. And I have them here so that the people that are on their laptops or hanging out having a conversation can see each other's faces here. Okay, so they're placed very evenly, and you can see that there's dimension lines that are calling out and telling the electrician, hey, this is where you need to cut a hole in the ceiling and run some electrical wire. See? So that's why those are here. See the pendant lights? There's a dimension line to them. Kind of hard to see. It's not ideal, but it's the best we can do. There's a little bit of an overlap, but you can see here I've got dimension lines. The dimension wouldn't fit into that section, so it's pulled out here 1'6", 2 feet 11 inches. So we'll be able to see exactly where to put these holes in the ceiling and run the electrical wire. Okay, so you can see those there as well. I also put them in the drywall ceiling here. Okay, just because they're a little bit prettier. The other thing that's on the ceiling here, and they're a little bit hard to see. Again, this is a plan that's got a result of a lot of careful planning, and it's still not perfect. There's still some overlaps, and there's still some things that are a little bit hard to see. But you can see here, I've got something that kind of looks like a recessed can light, and its symbol is right here. And this is a directional downlight. So that means that uh, I can put a bulb in it and I can direct it or angle it a little bit so that it's lighting this back wall. Sometimes these are called eyeballs. Sometimes they're called wall washers. You can also call them a directional downlight. That's what we're calling them here. And they're exactly the same as a recessed can light, except they've got a little bit of an angle that you can kind of tap and move directionally. And they're put here so that they will light up the sign that's got the menu on it along that back wall. And that's the only place that they're located. A couple of other things that are located on the walls that I want to talk about still. We do have a series of sconces, and again, there's a lot of different symbols for sconces, but this is the one that I selected. And you can see they're drawn here, and along this wall. Now here we've got another symbol overlapping on top of that, and I bet if you can read the legend, you can tell what it is. But those sconces are happening here and along here and along here, and along this wall as well, and down this corridor. And these are providing a little bit of ambient lighting, but mostly they're just accent lighting. They're providing some, some decorative interest, a little bit of variation along the wall plane, and just providing something, beautiful to look at. And so you can see those symbols are there. Now notice there's a note next to them that it's a sconce and the bottom is at 7'6". Again, that's because they have to be up a little bit higher so that they can clear a person walking by, and they are not recessed, or they have to be recessed less than 4 inches, so they can't be deeper than 4 inches thick if they are going to be in the path of egress, because you don't want somebody smacking their head on them or a blind person hitting their head on them as they're walking by. So these are shallow, so 4 inches or less if they're going to be lower than 80 inches AFF, and that's what we've got here. Now notice the symbol here doesn't necessarily look exactly like a plan view, or it's not exactly the same shape as our actual sconce, and that's okay. It's just supposed to be a symbol here for now. So you can see we've got sconces there, and we can see that the bottom is at 7'6" AFF. Okay, we're almost done with the stuff on the wall here. The last thing I want to show you is the outlets. And so these are wall outlets. So these are the things that you plug your laptop or your phone charger in. And there's a lot of outlets here because research indicates that people really like to gather around outlets. People need outlets when they go to places like this so that they can hang out and use their laptops, as I mentioned. It's also really important to have outlets for like plugging in the vacuum cleaner and plugging in appliances. So you can see here that there's some along the wall here, and then some, in the office, for example, they're on the wall for the vacuum cleaner, to plug in the phone, the computer. Maybe there's some sort of equipment here that in the storage room that needs outlets. So those are placed throughout. And those are just the single duplex outlets, and they're located at 1'6" AFF, unless otherwise noted. So they're 18 inches off the ground, and that's probably close to what your outlets are in your house. But there's a couple here, these ones in the back. Notice how it says on this legend there, it's 1'6" AFF unless otherwise noted. So the otherwise noted part happens here. So these outlets are located at 3'6" AFF. And that's so that people who are sitting at the booth can plug in things, because the booth would be blocking the outlets if they were 1'8" AFF. So that's why they're imposing on here. Now notice the orientation of the outlet symbol to the wall. Now it's a lot bigger than what a plug looks like, but it's basically a plug in plan view. So you can see the little prongs sticking towards the wall. We also have some here, and these are still at 18 inches AFF, but you can see there's not a wall here because you wouldn't see it looking up if you were laying on the floor, because a reflected ceiling plan usually shows from about 5 feet or so up. So that's why you don't see the wall there, but they would be plugged into the bar wall. You can see that there are some outlets here that have a little letter next to them, and that says GFI. And that's the symbol right here, single GFI outlet at 3 foot 6 inches AFF. Now these are up higher because this is where the appliances are going to plug in. And you can see there's some in here as well. GFI stands for ground fault interrupter, and you have to have GFI outlets anywhere within 5 feet of water. So maybe you've noticed this before in your bathroom or in your kitchen, but your outlet, the outlets there have a little red button. And if you maybe plug in your hair dryer and your hair dryer doesn't work, sometimes you have to push that little red button. And that's basically because somehow the outlet got tripped and it's turning itself off. So all of these outlets will turn themselves off if they're exposed to water. So you always have to use a GFI outlet anywhere near water, and that's what that little label indicates. The last outlet that you're seeing here is this one right here. And it's got, its symbol is a little outlet with an R next to it, and that indicates the single range outlet. You can see it's got 3 prongs, and it's located at 2 feet 0 inches AFF because that's where we're going to plug the cooler into. Okay. Okay, so now there's one more set of symbols that are really important for us, and these are located on the wall and on the ceiling, but I talked about them separately because they're related to fire suppression. And the 2 symbols that I want to draw your attention to are these right here. So the little black dot is a sprinkler, and a sprinkler will come down and pop open and spray water in the presence of smoke or fire, depending on the sprinkler. And you can see here, these are placed every, let's see, 12 feet. No matter what, it doesn't matter what's inside, what's in the way, they have to be, their location is set because they have a spray around their perimeter like that creates a circle, and that spray needs to overlap with the one next to it. So that's what those little dots are for. And then the last thing is the exit lights. And so you can see we've got one here, one here, one here, and one here. And that's, one of those green, or white signs with green or red letters, and it says exit on it. Now, in this case, it's pretty straightforward because anywhere you sit in here, you would be able to see an exit sign, and then people would know, hey, I just run through that door, and then I'll hit an exit here, or I can exit through this door, and then most of the seats would be able to see this one. You don't need an exit sign in front of these really small rooms because people know they have to go out that door and then look left, right, and they'll see an exit sign. In larger projects, if you don't see that exit sign right above the door, anywhere you look, there's other signs that also say exit that just have arrows on them, and they are placed in certain locations to make sure that no matter where you are in a building, anywhere you look, you can see an exit sign or see an exit. Now, these 2 things are handled by a fire suppression specialist. It's really just having an awareness and planning for them, and that's our intent here. So reflected ceiling plan is sort of a difficult thing to make because you as the designer might just be focused on the drop ceilings that have beautiful wood planking and these awesome lights that you've selected. But you also have to know that we've got, an acoustical ceiling tile with some fluorescent lights in it. We've got air supply and return vents, exhaust vents, sprinklers, exit signs, down lights, and all of, electrical outlets, all these other things that have to be coordinated and make sure that the resulting design, you don't have 2 things in the same spot because you can't put a sprinkler where there's a light, and that everything still is placed in a way that meets all of the requirements and still is this somewhat beautiful, orderly plan. Wow. So this is your reflected ceiling plan for this very simple project, but you can see based on what we've talked about with the annotations, with the placement of objects in the acoustical ceiling, tile ceiling, the drywall ceiling, the wood plank ceiling, between all the electrical outlets and the fire suppression equipment, that at the end of this is a rather complex process. But now you're ready to do it, and you'll be able to see, if you overlay this plan on top of your floor plan, that it should line up, and it should, your drop ceiling should should hang over your seating arrangements as well. One final note, if you do overlay this plan and you can see your furniture underneath it through your vellum, I want to just bring out one final little design point, which is you can see in the main areas that the especially over here, you can see that the ceiling treatment and the lighting isn't placed exactly perfectly over the four top tables here. And that's because we want our reflected ceiling plan to still work even if the furniture moves around a little bit. So consider the placement of your fixtures and all of your elements as they relate to the furniture on the ground below, but also sort of be thinking about the ceiling um, as its own unit that may or may not change even if the furniture gets rearranged. Okay, so now you know how to design one, you know all the symbols that are required, and how to put it on a plan so that everything is more or less in a good spot without too much overlap.